Hi, everyone. I'm Dr. Wendy Strickler from Mount St. Joseph University, and I am going to spend a couple minutes talking to you about learning styles, reality or myth. So this is a little bit of an educational myth buster. So have you ever wondered if you are a visual or auditory or kinesthetic learner? Have you ever been given a survey or an inventory to figure it out, or been told by a teacher that you have a particular learning style or learning preference? It is really common in education, in our culture, in society to be thinking about these different pieces. But I have some bad news for you. It's really not a great use of time, and some would even consider it a waste of time, depending on how you look at it. Not because it can't be interesting. It absolutely can be interesting to reflect on and think about. And there is no doubt that we all have particular preferences. I like seeing things visually. But interestingly, what's been found in a large body of research is that there is no support to indicate that this in any way improves learning. So the fact that I prefer to see things visually is fine. There's no problem with that. But the reality is that allowing me to see things visually does not improve my learning of any particular content, even though I might be a quote unquote visual learner. If you have been asked these questions or have thought about this, you are absolutely not alone. In a survey done in 2014, 90% of teachers across many different countries believed in learning styles to some degree. So this is a really common belief and unfortunately a really common misperception that this can make a difference to how we think about our classrooms. Again, it's not that it can't be interesting, but we can't use this information to capitalize upon learning. Why? Why is that the case? Well, let's do a little activity to think about it. I want you to take a minute and think back to something you learned in math last year. So I'll give you a few seconds to think about it. You can pause if you would like longer, but think about something you learned, anything that comes to mind that you learned in math last year or within the last year. Now I want you to take a few seconds and describe what you learned. Okay, you've given it some thought. You've described it a little bit. So here are my questions for you. Did you describe the font you learned that math concept in? Because if we're really focusing on what it would mean to be a visual learner and to be focused on the visual aspect of things, it would be the font size, the font type, whether it was Arial or Times New Roman, that would have stood out to you in your learning. No, probably not. Did you describe the pitch of the voice teaching? Was it a high voice or low voice teaching the content? Is that what stood out to you when you think about your learning? Because that would be related to that auditory preference. Did you describe how it felt to hold your pencil and try out that mathematics? Probably not, right? But this is the essence of being a visual or auditory or kinesthetic learner, and the way it has been thought about in the research and in the way many, many people have tried to show that there would be a place to utilize this in the classroom. But why not? The reason why not is because the way the majority of our memories are stored is by meaning, not by modality. Now, that doesn't mean there aren't things that we don't store based on specific modality. There is meaning-based learning that we've done that makes more sense that it's visual, like where something exists on a map or on a globe, right? That would be something that if we were asked, we would think about it visually because that's what it lends itself to. But at the end of the day, coming up with that visual representation is about making meaning of where that country is in the world. And so our focus shouldn't be thinking about how do I teach to specific learning styles or specific modalities. That doesn't get us any bang for our buck. The focus should be, how do I teach for meaning of the content? That's what I want students to retain. That's what I want them to hold on to, is the meaning of a specific body of information or a specific material or piece of content that I'm trying to teach. And when I say that, doesn't it make so much sense? Of course, I don't care whether you remember this information in terms of whether my voice was high or low. What I want is that you remember this general meaning-based idea of where we should focus our attention, on meaning, not on learning styles. What I'm sharing with you is supported by a very large body of research. One of the first most comprehensive meta-analyses that was done, which is a review of the literature that exists, was done in 1987 by Cavell and Fornes. And without a doubt, what they found is that most studies did not find any kind of significant effect of trying to focus on learning styles. The few studies that did find some kind of positive effect weren't very methodologically sound. They had methodological errors that really meant you couldn't put any weight behind the results. And when those ones with methodological flaws were eliminated from the overall body of research to look at, there was no effect of learning styles. And I want you to understand that this is in the context of hundreds of researchers who've gone into this research expecting to find that learning styles make a difference, wanting to find that learning styles make a difference, going in, writing up very positive introductions about how they would find the way that learning styles can be targeted in a classroom to make a difference for instruction. And the reality is it just hasn't borne out in any of those studies. In a more recent 2008 review from Psychological Science, Paschler and colleagues found the following. Although the literature on learning styles is enormous, they found virtually no evidence that instruction is best provided in a format that matches the preference of the learner. It just didn't make a difference to learning outcomes. And they followed up by saying the second quote here, the contrast between the enormous popularity of the learning styles approach within education and the lack of credible evidence for its utility is, in our opinion, striking and disturbing. It is very rare as teachers that we're told we can take something off our plate. Usually we are just adding on like, oh, fit this in as well, and let's do this. So here's what I'm saying to you. Take learning style inventories off your plate. It is not where you want to focus your energy and time at the beginning of the year. That doesn't mean don't get to know your students. By all means, we know relationship building is important. Learn about them, learn their interests, learn how you can connect classroom examples and practice activities to things your students are interested in and like. That's different. But when it comes to focusing on a specific learning style inventory and taking time to do surveys and figure out results, that's not where we're going to get bang for our buck. So leave that piece behind. Take it off your plate. One final thought, so I don't leave you hanging with what not to do, is what to do instead. So instead of worrying about targeting specific students with specific learning style information, instead we want to provide multisensory, multimodal instruction as often as possible. And we also want to focus on our content and what the best way to teach meaning for that particular content is. So let's spend just a minute or two talking about those two pieces. So why multisensory or multimodal instruction all the time? Well, there is some good research support done by Marzano and others, and kind of shown here graphically in this dual coding theory, that our brain takes in information through multiple senses. And we absolutely know this to be true in terms of having both a linguistic pathway, which is the word or language pathway you see on the bottom part of the slide, and a non-linguistic pathway, which would be visual or pictorial picture pathway, which you see on the upper part of the slide. So if we know that our brain has two different pathways and can simultaneously take in information visually through pictures and linguistically through words, and I provide you both of those avenues for access to information, I've just increased your opportunity for access, increased your opportunity for understanding, increased your opportunity for retention twofold, because you've got two pathways for access to the information, right? So case in point right here, is there a reason that I'm telling you this verbally and putting a graphic on the slide for you? Yes, I am right now providing multimodal instruction. You've got it linguistically, auditorily through the words I'm sharing with you, and you've got it visually through the imagery that's here. I don't care whether you may have a preference for visual or auditory. I care that your brain is able to take it in both ways and is maximizing benefit through that opportunity. Okay, so maximize the different modalities we can provide to give access to content through multiple different senses. And just to give you one more example of that I've seen in a math classroom and really appreciated was when a teacher was teaching angles. She was explaining verbally what defines a right angle while showing it visually, right? A right angle has 90 degrees, an acute angle is smaller than 90 degrees, an obtuse angle is larger. She was using hand gestures to show it. She had visuals, she was explaining it. And then, and I loved this, she had all the students stand up and put their arms out, and she would yell out one of the different angles, and they would have to show it with their arms. So acute, right, obtuse. I don't know if you can see me. Acute, right, obtuse, right, acute, right, acute, obtuse. And they would have to kinesthetically act out showing the different angles. So think about this very quick lesson where the teacher has now gone over these three types, has talked about them auditorily, has provided samples visually, and has had students engage kinesthetically. Now you've got this full smorgasbord that has the opportunity to engage the senses in understanding this meaning-based concept. So multimodal whenever possible, multisensory whenever possible. Think about all the different avenues in which you can help students access information, not because they have a particular learning style, but because we all learn through all of our senses, and we want to capitalize on that in our classrooms. And then the last piece of the puzzle is focusing on the content. As I said earlier, you want students to learn the meaning of what you're presenting, right? Not whether it's in a high voice or low voice, or whether it's in Comic Sans or Times New Roman, but whether they're understanding the meaning behind the words and the content that you are sharing. And so with that in mind, rather than ever focusing on a specific student's learning style, we need to focus on the modalities that make sense for the particular content. Now, with the math example I just gave, we always want to be thinking multisensory. So provide any sensory experiences you can. But with that in mind, there are some content areas and some material that's going to lend itself to absolutely needing a particular sensory experience. So for example, if I'm teaching geography, I probably want to have some visuals. Can you imagine trying to explain where something is in the world simply auditorily? It wouldn't make any sense. If I said to you right now, well, the country of Germany is east of Asia, but west of France, you would be like, what is she doing? Like, show me a map, right? So there are content areas like geography and art that are going to lend themselves to needing to be visual, possibly needing to be kinesthetic. Music and language, there has to be an auditory component to them. I am never going to master a French or a Spanish language if I don't ever hear it, right? Do I also need to see it and experience it? Absolutely. But hearing it is a critical part of that auditory piece. If I'm learning how to play basketball or learning a math procedure, I better be doing it at some point and engaging kinesthetically, or I'm not going to get the concept. So it doesn't mean don't use multiple modalities. You absolutely should, but also think about what makes sense for particular content and for particular learning. And you're going to be much better off when you're lesson planning, thinking about those critical pieces than focusing on a debunked myth. So big picture takeaway, so what? Don't focus on the learning styles for individual students. Focus on strong instruction and evidence-based practices, like using multiple modalities and aligning those modalities to what makes sense for the content and the meaning-based learning that you want to happen so that you see success for all of your students. Thanks for joining me. And here are some references used to support this presentation. Bye.